This week on Supercars Talk, I look at the conundrum that Kelly Racing finds themselves in. After looking at the conundrum Gary Rogers Motorsport finds itself in last week, I thought this week would be a good chance to have a look at the other Supercars team that's found themselves running a TCR operation, the conundrum that they kind of find themselves in. Basically, the problem that Kelly Racing finds themselves in at the moment is they were running the factory Nissan cars for, I think it was 6 years. Now they find themselves, there's no factory backing, so no one kind of supporting those cars. Now they're stuck with an aging car that's uncompetitive as well. There is a slight kind of aero upgrade they're getting for the bend. This is an interesting one because it seems to be basically reversing what they did at the start of the year. At the start of the year, I think they took a little bit of downforce off the rear and put a little bit on the front. And from what I can gather is that they've now taken the extra downforce that they put on the front at the start of the year and added a little bit onto the rear, slightly different way to how they had it previously. But essentially, I think they're trying to return it back to the aero package that they had last year. And I think that was 2015 was the last time their aero package was revised. So they had that for quite a few years. They knew what was going on with it. So it's not, I don't think it's really an upgrade for them. I think it's just kind of reversing back to where they were. So yeah, maybe better the devil you know than the devil you don't. I'll start off with a bit of a brief history of the team. We might get a few things wrong because this is all coming off the top of my head. But basically what happened in the kind of, well, this was in the early 2000s. Tom Walkinshaw Racing, they ran HRT at the time, and they were dabbling. They decided, there was a quote once, and you want to build the best team in the country and then build a big fort around it, was basically the quote. And the idea was that you had HRT at the top, and then they had their secondary team, which that was Kmart Racing. And I think the Kmart thing kind of came about when Gibson went to Ford and Kmart wanted to stay with Murphy and Holden. The Kmart money and Murphy went from the Gibson operation, that went across to the Tom Walkinshaw operation, and they made Kmart Racing, which was a secondary team. Had Greg Murphy and young Todd Kelly as the team drivers. And then later on, we saw Rick Kelly move into that seat when Todd moved up to the top HRT team. So they ran like that for a couple of years. And then just as HRT was, or Tom Walkinshaw was also bringing in the Paul Wheel racing team, PWR, he was bringing them into the fold. So they had 6 cars kind of under the one umbrella. And around this time, Tom Walkinshaw was also running a Formula One team, Arrows. That went under, and it had a kind of ripple-on effect and took down all of his other racing operations around the world. So the Paul Wheel thing, because that had just kind of come into the fold, that was quite easy. They owned the racing entitlements contracts at the time, so it just went off to the side. But there was the 4 wrecks at the time. It was a little bit different setup then. Essentially, we'll say how it is nowadays with the 4 wrecks. So the 4 wrecks were owned by Tom Walkinshaw. Holden kind of went over to Britain quickly and bought the entries off the liquidators and came back. And then Supercars said, hey, manufacturer's not allowed to own a team. So they quickly had to find buyers for the teams, and that's where Scaife took over HRT. And the Kellys' parents actually bought the Kmart Racing ones. So that essentially became 2 different teams. It was a HRT satellite operation at the time. So, it was 4 cars running under the one roof. Then as Tom Walkinshaw was kind of becoming a bit more involved, they had a weird setup where you had Walkinshaw owned Holden Motorsport or whatever it was at the time, and then HRT and the Kellys were customers of them, and kind of bought the cars and engines and personnel and I think everything off them. The relationship there started to sour. We did see Todd go from HRT off to Perkins for a year. At the time, it seemed like a bit of a strange move. Then Larry went off to retirement. The Kellys took their Rex over to Moorabbin, and well, actually, I think they're now in Braeside. They set up a new factory with all of it. But Perkins used to be out at Moorabbin and had the 4 cars in one, doing everything, building their own engines, the whole lot. This was 2008, I think it was, and then obviously when Car of the Future came in, 2013, and they became Nissan Racing, and they've been racing the Ultimas ever since. Now, a lot of people criticise the Kellys for running 4 cars, saying they should go back to 2 and, concentrate on 2 cars, get that right, things like that. Now, it's an interesting sport that we're in, and when you look through the field, I think it's only the Penske team that kind of are running 2 cars and doing it all themselves. If you look at like Triple Eight, yes, they build the cars, but they also then supply cars to quite a few other teams. They also don't have their own engine shop. They buy in the engines from Noonan's, I think it is. And like Brad Jones, they build their own cars, but they're a Noonan engine customer. And then the other, I think it's all 3 of the Triple Eight customer car teams, Charlie's, Techno and Matt Stone Racing get their engines in from Noonan's as well. So, there's this economies of scale thing, and then you have like Tickford. Obviously, they have their 4 cars for their own engine shop, doing their own engines for themselves. Plus, they've got development series cars and things like that. And then over you've got Walkinshaw. Obviously, they do their own cars, but then they have their own engine shop and produce engines for Erebus and Gary Rogers. And then Erebus and Gary Rogers build their own cars themselves. So a lot of them kind of do their own cars, but with the engines and stuff. So you've only got Penske by themselves that are doing their own engines. So if you look at the Kellys, they would then, if you go back to 2 cars, then what happens with the engine shop? Like it's a lot of money to run, a whole engine program for 2 cars. If you don't understand with kind of economies of scale, say like we'll look at one part of the equation is the dyno. So, that's an expensive thing. You have to set up your special room in the workshop for it, things like that. Have someone to operate it and all that kind of stuff, and, all the money to run it and everything. And then say that costs you, I don't know, this is totally plucking a figure out of the sky, but say your dyno shop costs you $200,000 a year to run. If you've only got 2 cars, that's essentially $100,000 for each car. If you've got 4 cars with that engine shop, you've got $50,000 for each car for the year. So it brings the cost down relative a lot, and that's a cost that really, if you have your own engine program, you have to run something like that. It's not like, okay, if you're building engines for 4 cars, you might need kind of 5 people working in the shop or something. If you're only doing 2 cars, you might only need 3 people. So you do need to put on more people, but you probably don't need as many, if you get what I mean. Like, you might need 3 people to do 2 and 5 people to do 4. Once again, I'm kind of just plucking numbers out of the air here. Don't shoot me if the numbers are totally wrong. But you've got this economies of scale. So that's why they've set up with the 4-car model. It's basically the same as what Tickford do, and things like, as I said, Walkinshaw, they've got 6 cars running their engines, plus there's probably a few development series cars and things like that. So plus, now with the Ultimate program, Matt Stone Racing in Super 2, they're running 3 cars with the Ultima and with the engine and all that. So that's why they've gone for the 4-car setup, and that's why they'll be sticking at the 4 cars. Now, the next thing we hear all the time is, Kelly's, they should just go and buy a Holden and rah, rah, rah. And it's funny, Speed Cafe did a poll on this last week, and, what do the fans think Kelly should do next year? About 55% said they should race a Mustang, 25% say they should upgrade the Altima, which is already kind of happening this week. 14% say they should run the Commodore, and 6% were unsure. A little bit interesting that, and the way I see it is, we've got new rules coming in 2021. I think, it could change, who knows. But, this could open it up to different body shapes, things like that. They might be looking at that to try and entice a new manufacturer, or, go for a Camaro maybe, something like that. People think it's just as simple as you go down to the Mustang shop and, buy a few Mustangs. It's not quite that simple. You've got a couple of ways of doing it. You either have to convert the cars over, or, buy or build new cars. Now, 4 cars, no easy task. And then also, you've got the engine program as well. So, let's have a look at the Mustang. So, right, you've got to somehow convert 4 cars. That's Christmas just totally gone on that. Or you kind of go to Tickford, well, can we buy one? Or maybe you start building a couple of new ones now. And then, turf it, or, possibly even sell the old ones, the old Nissans, to a Super 2 team, possibly. But then you also, does the Super 2 team want them if, the main team's not running anymore? No support, who's building parts for them, things like that. So the car's a lot of work, and then the engine program. They've got this, might not be the best engine program down there, but they have their engine program with the Nissans. Do you continue with your own engine program, or do you just say, oh, well, we're going to shut all that part of the factory down, we're going to get rid of these people, and we're going to buy in the engines from Tickford? Does Tickford have the capacity to do that? So do they kind of turn around and go, like, if they wanted to add in, they're running a wildcard next weekend, that's fine. But to actually run 4 full-time cars, all of a sudden, that's probably, say, another 8 engines that you need in the mix, just, from the sky. And now, it's funny because we're talking about engine costs and stuff. Now, engines have gone from people saying they're $100,000 and like $40,000 rebuild to, I heard figures the other day that, it's $200,000 an engine and, 50, 60 grand a rebuild. I don't think it's quite that high, but imagine, let's even, round figures, we'll say the engines are worth 150 grand each. That's still 600 grand of race engines and 600 grand of spare engines. All of a sudden, you just got to, from the sky or something, pluck $1.2 million just to switch, your basic engine package over. This is why I think the Kellys will be sticking with the Nissan next year and not going anywhere, because it's just, you're throwing out so much equipment and starting from scratch with so much equipment. And then also you look at, if they are, kind of converting their Nissans over, where is the actual deficiency in the Nissan? Like, they're playing around with the aero a bit here. They don't seem to be saying too much about the engine these days. And with the horsepower limit, things like that, is the engine really lacking? So if the aero's okay on it, if the engine's okay on it, it's kind of, the other bits are, the Kelly Racing kind of suspension design on there. Now, if they go to a Mustang and they're running their suspension bits and pieces, who's to say that they're not going to just get the same results with that? It's not just, Mustang's not some silver bullet to go and win races, I don't think. So, and essentially the same thing if they go to the Commodore. They've had a little bit of history there. They probably kind of remember a bit back in the day when they were running the Holden engines. So that would probably be a slightly easier transition for them, but still, it's a lot of money to go and throw in the bin. I think they're probably in the background working on, another manufacturer to come in and, kind of stump up some of that cost to switch over. And probably the final issue, well, the big issues that everyone discusses that Kelly Racing are facing is the driver lineup. So currently we've got, Rick Kelly locked in, good sponsorship package there. We've got Gary Jacobson, Simona Di Silvestro and Andre Heimgartner. Now all of them in some form or another are bringing money. Possibly not the best way to move forward. I'd have to admit, Andre's kind of really stepped up this year and taken the Caruso kind of rear gunner push kind of Rick Kelly role. He's doing great at that. But you do have to wonder if maybe they could find some more money and put, it's a bit hard thinking of a driver that would fit in there and, would drastically improve results. Obviously, if you put a Scott McLaughlin in there, the thing's going to skyrocket a bit, but he's definitely not available to the team. And unless they get some, really big blue chip sponsor from somewhere, you're not going to entice someone like that to the team. So they're a bit stuck at the moment. You could, possibly someone like a Todd Hazelwood or something like that. You could bring him into the fold, but also Todd doesn't really come with money package, so you'd still need to find a fairly decent sponsor that would want to take a bit of pain to go with that. So basically, in summary, in the perfect world, Kelly's would just go and find another manufacturer to, stump up the money and get a couple of blue chip sponsors in, and it'd all be rosy. When you think back, and they had the 2 Jack Daniels car and the 2 Norton cars, and they had Nissan money coming in, life was probably pretty good. It's quite a different scene at the moment. So I think for, at least for next year will be another kind of stopgap year for them, where, they kind of look competitive at a few rounds, and most of the time they're kind of playing around the back. Could be in trouble if the Simona and her money package is going elsewhere. That could put a bit of a dent in it as well, which that even further enforces that they're probably not going to change anything. But I think they probably look at it as a bit of another interim year where they kind of tread water a bit until they can, really make a decision, see what these Gen 3 rules really are and see what all the changes are going to be for that, whether they can entice someone new in or whether it's worth looking at, building some new cars and going, Mustang, Camaro, whatever, if Commodore's still going, things like that. So that's my take on the Kelly Racing Conundrum. If you've got any questions or comments, leave them down below. If you want a bit more information about what's going on, or have some questions about some of the other teams, what's going on there, just let me know, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. Until next time, I'll see you later.
Put away your inhibitions, let the beast in you just get loose. We all young, wild, and